Welcome back to the Data Protection Diaries, welcome back to the vlog, and welcome back to part 2 of our incident reporting and investigation mini-series. If you haven't seen part 1 of this series, please do make sure that you go and watch that video before you watch this one. In this series, we're running through the process of firstly identifying and investigating an incident, but then also reporting that incident to the ICO and the process of what happens next. So it's important that you have the context from part 1 before you watch this video. And if you click up the top here, you'll be able to go and watch part 1. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please do also make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Click this little bell icon down on the screen as well. That will tell you when the next video in this series gets uploaded. Again, if you haven't watched part 1, please do go and watch that. There will also be subsequent parts to this series, so we are not going to cover off everything in this video. In this episode though, we are going to look at reporting the incident to the Information Commissioner's Office. What did we have to do? How did we do it? And what information was provided? But also, subsequently, the response, the initial response that we got from the Information Commissioner's Office, and then we're going to talk about next steps. As I've said before, if you are not subscribed and you want to know what happens, please do make sure that you subscribe, because there are going to be subsequent parts and you will need to see part 3 to see what happens. But for now, let's get on with what we're going to be talking about. A quick recap from part 1 of this video. Part 1, we identified an incident involving some special category information. That information was downloaded from a customer database, from a CRM, packaged up, emailed over to a number of authorized individuals, a number of different agencies, and within that email trail there was a third party who should not have received the information. The information that was provided contained some particularly sensitive special category information, and because of the nature of that information and the potential risk of harm to the individuals involved, a decision was taken to report that incident to the Information Commissioner's Office. First things first, we had to report the incident to the Information Commissioner. Now, reporting of incidents to the ICO is a fairly easy process. There are a couple of options available to you. The first is that you can call the helpline, so you can call the ICO hotline and you can report the incident over the phone. This is often easier if you have a small incident that doesn't have a lot of detail, or if you're fairly confident you know what's happened and you just want to report something quick and easily. If your incident contains more information or is potentially more complex and you'd like to take more time to investigate so that you can provide additional information, you can also report the incident online. To do both of these things, you first of all just need to go to the ICO website, look for breach reporting on the right hand side and select the relevant category. For this instance, it was a personal data breach under the DPA 2018, and we decided to report that online. So we downloaded the relevant incident reporting form and we started to fill in the information that we had to provide. So filling in the form, obviously there's some fairly standard things that you need to provide. Main things being, of course, the date, when you found out about the incident, when the incident actually occurred, the nature of the breach, so what has happened, who is involved, so what kind of individuals were involved, what kind of information was involved, how sensitive that information is, and additionally, what steps have already been taken to remediate the issue. So if it was a system issue, has that been patched? If it was a training issue, have people been provided with training? Then we have to go into the detail of the incident itself. Now, at the time that we reported the incident, we had a fairly reasonable idea of what had happened. So we started to complete the form on that basis. We knew that we were probably going to have to provide more information down the line because we didn't have all of the facts, but what we wanted to do was make sure that the report was logged and the incident was raised within the 72-hour period. And that's what's really critical when you are reporting an incident. It is sometimes better to get information over, to provide the report, to log the incident, and then provide additional information later than run the risk of missing that 72-hour deadline. Now, when you issue a report or an incident to the ICO, you will generally be given an investigator or a case handler. So somebody within the ICO that is going to deal with that case for you, is going to investigate your incident, and is going to ask you questions back and forth. So at this point, we are now given an investigator, we are given a case handler, and the initial response from the ICO has started to come back through to us. Unsurprisingly, as this was a relatively complicated incident involving different categories of information, involving different groups of people, and also involving different agencies, the initial response from the regulator was quite detailed, and it is quite detailed. In fact, I have it in front of me, and we are up to 21 questions of clarification in the initial response. Our report contained all of the information that was reasonably and readily available to us at the time that the incident was reported. So we had expected there to be some additional questions come back. Now, to give you an idea of the kind of information that we have been asked for subsequently, I'll give you a bit of a rundown of some of the things that the ICO have asked for. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail because it isn't about picking out the specifics of this case. This is just to give you an indication and an idea of how this process works. So the first thing we were asked for is just some further clarity and a full explanation of how the incident occurred. So what happened, why did it happen, why did things progress in the way that they did, and how did we look to manage that. The second thing that we were asked for is confirmation that the incident was reported internally. Now, this is really important especially when you're dealing with an incident, because having an incident log allows you as an organisation to identify and keep a record of what work you have done. And that's incredibly important because when you're dealing with a regulator, they're going to want to understand that you know what's happened, that you're keeping a log of what's going on, that you're keeping a record, and you're understanding where you are. So we provided a copy of the incident log as well. The next key thing that we were asked to clarify was the type and nature of the information that was involved in the breach. Now, as I mentioned in part one of this video, some of the information relates to various parties, so there's a number of different people involved, but because of the nature of the information and the potential sensitivities, there was quite a lot to unpick there. So what the ICO are really asking for is some clarity around what that information is, who it could potentially affect, and of course, ultimately, what could be the risk to those individuals. Interestingly, the main body of the initial response actually relates to what kind of training has been provided internally. Were processes in place to try and avoid this kind of situation from happening? Were those processes followed? If those processes weren't followed, what caused them not to be followed? In addition to that, where training was provided, was a record of training kept? Is a record of training maintained? And how did we confirm that there is an understanding of the training that has been provided? Now, this comes up a lot when the ICO are talking about investigations, when they're talking about incidents. Having policies, procedural documentation within your organisation is of course important, but ensuring that your employees are trained appropriately on that policy, on that process, and making sure that they understand it in some way, shape or form is really, really critical, especially when you're dealing with an incident and you're trying to demonstrate that you had the right controls in place. You can do this a number of different ways. You can have questions at the end of training. You can have live training sessions where you get people to confirm. You can have people sat with other members of teams when they're learning new systems, and you can get them to run a couple of processes through, and you can check that they've done it correctly. Whichever way you choose to do it, having a clear record of that and being able to demonstrate that to the regulator in the event of an incident is really, really important. And fortunately, in this instance, we were able to provide that documentation and be able to build up a picture of the culture of compliance within the organisation. The final questions from the case and in this particular incident relate to the remedial action. So the incident has been identified, it's been investigated, we have reported it, but what's being done to stop this incident from happening again, or to stop this type of incident from happening again? For me, it's really important that when an incident is identified, that remedial work is carried out as soon as possible. There are very often things that you can do while you're investigating the incident to start putting extra controls in place, to start identifying things that can be done to make improvements. And the sooner those things are done, the less likely there are to be concerns coming further down the line. Again, what's really, really important here, and I can't stress enough, is documentation. So making sure that the risks that you've identified, the areas, the challenges that have been identified, and the mitigating controls that you've put in place are documented. These must be written down, demonstrating that you've been able to train and you've been able to get these processes back out into the business, and demonstrating that there is knowledge and understanding of those processes is really, really important. And that is the information that is being asked in this particular case. What did we do? How did we do it? And how are we going to evidence that these changes have been made? As of today, this is still an ongoing case. So we have responded to the regulator, we responded to our case handler. We have had some further questions back, which we are now formulating a response to. In part 3 of this video, we are going to go through the next stage of this investigation and the next stage of this particular complaint handling with the case officer. I'm hoping in part 3, maybe we'll come to a resolution, maybe we'll be able to go through what the ending of this particular investigation is and what that means. For now, please do make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so that you're informed when the next video comes out, and let us know in the comments below, how do you think this incident has been handled? Would you have done anything differently? What are your experience of dealing with the regulator in this kind of case? Have you ever had to report an incident to the regulator? What are your thoughts? Of course, like the video if you find the content useful and interesting, and we really look forward to seeing you in part 3. Thanks very much.